And welcome back to the MVP podcast, everyone. We are again in the quarantine files of our podcast, and we have a very special guest today, Milissa Douponce. Milissa, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, James.
Of course, I feel like we are amongst royalty here. You know, you've built a nice career as being a marketing strategist known for your crazy ideas, your partnership, outstandish thinking, as well as being able to drive results for your marketing efforts, and most recently as the vice president of international marketing with Sony Pictures. So thank you very much for being on the show, I should say.
Thank you. This is a really crazy time. I think the good part is it's giving, at least for me, it's giving me a chance to kind of have the solitude to explore new stuff and to look at, to be creative and to do this interview. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. You know, it's funny that you mentioned the creativity part. As someone who, us collectively at MVP are creative technologists, right? But I would say as a marketer and the overall sort of society, coming into this pandemic, I personally felt within the first, maybe the first 3 to 4 weeks that I was at a real creative stunt. And I didn't, we tried to kind of regroup as a team here and pivot and think about new strategies and new technology. And I struggled early on, but, it seemed like the fog has cleared to a degree, and we've been able to spin out some pretty neat things. But how about yourself? I mean, as someone that has constantly had to think creatively and really market for large brands and movies. And so when things go on hold, how did you kind of spur your creativity back up?
I think for me, it's about, because when COVID started, I was in Kuala Lumpur in December, and then I was in the hot spot I went through Hong Kong for a movie. I did an activation in Singapore off the coast on Sentosa Island in Singapore. And, so I feel like I felt kind of the COVID, the COVID-19 stuff early on. Mm-hmm. So as I was coming back, there was a lag on what was, then it hit Italy, Europe, and then the United States.
Sure.
So my brain went immediately to like, this is serious, because early February, even at my hotel, I was getting my temperature taken. We were washing our hands. The Singaporean government was definitely giving guidelines because they were so experienced with SARS.
Sure.
So I when I was coming back, I was literally like, oh, movie theaters, depending on how the US handles this, movie theaters and other places that people congregate are really going to be challenged. From a creative standpoint, my brain went to, I was kind of monitoring what the situation was. And then my brain was going to like, how can use my skills? How can I help? How can I solve problems? Are drive-in theaters going to come back, which is actually happening? A lot of people are doing drive-in initiatives. My husband, who is very technical, and he's giving a lot of sound support and engineering support to a lot of online activations. But he was immediately like, oh yeah, we could do a drive-in. You can just run it through, you can run it through your phone. And so I guess my point is that, whatever creatively, skills or ideas that I had, I was just thinking like, how can we apply them to, help out and to pitch into what's happening now?
Sure.
And that was really early. That was early on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, talk about having the the foresight of what was coming when you were overseas like that. Must have been an interesting scenario, and we'll actually get into why you were overseas once we kind of talk a little bit more about your background. And so the new listeners and old listeners are aware that we try to talk about all things experiential marketing, in particular with technology, as well as other startup business and entrepreneurial type of topics. But what's so exciting about having you on in particular is you really speak our language, and you have a really an over 12-year career in experiential and really driving value for brands. So why don't you walk us through a little bit of your career and actually how you ended up, and maybe some of the things you are doing or have done for Sony Pictures?
Sure. Well, I'm a military brat. So I kind of grew up everywhere, all over the country, Oklahoma, San Francisco, Germany. My mother is Japanese. So, I grew up in a very kind of multicultural background. And I was always drawn to visual arts and specifically intrigued with good design. So especially if it was smart or clever or surprising or funny. And then I began my career in San Francisco and New York, working at the Mad Men type agencies of Great Global and McCann Erickson back in the 90s. And I worked on everything. I was an art director and creative director, so I worked on consumer packaged goods from cereal to Hasbro to over-the-counter foot fungus cream, you name it.
That sounds a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. It was. I think it was. It was definitely. It was. I always found like the stuff that nobody cared about was the thing that you could do the most creative stuff with.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, and it was a brand with a yellow can, and so we put like construction workers and military guys in yellow fuzzy slippers. I remember that was the campaign.
Nice.
Yeah, but I also had a small design studio doing advertising and retail. After that, I was doing retail packaging for sporting goods. And then I was so lucky to get a job running the photo department at NBC Television. In the old days where, I worked on TV shows and sports and the Olympics and news. And that was a creative direction job, kind of helping and producing photo shoots that provided the assets for all of the NBC marketing in Burbank and in 30 Rock.
Okay.
And then, so there I was poached from Sony Pictures, where I then did the same job. I was producing shoots for, James Bond and Spider-Man with filmmakers and actors. And because I was becoming such a specialist in that part of my career, I was always intrigued, as I said earlier, with international business. So a position opened up in marketing for a strategy position. And one thing being a visual arts creative, I liked problem solving. And the thing I was always missing, and I went to business school, was how to quantify any visual executions or creative executions, really how to quantify it from a business standpoint. Mm-hmm. So this position opened up in international marketing. And the guy who ran it, Sal Adestrial, he's absolutely just brilliant. He's pretty much a legend in terms of the movie world. He brought Crouching Tiger to the United States. He worked on Django Unchained, Capote, Kung Fu Hustle, all these kind of, highly lauded movies that were art house. And he was working on a movie called Whiplash. And I threw my hat in the ring, and he knew me from, he was a stakeholder of mine when I ran photography, and I wrote a plan for Whiplash International. And he took a chance on me and gave me a job. So from then I became, his VP of International Marketing, where I did strategy, but I also did, activations. I also, we were kind of an entrepreneurial smaller department because the types of movies we worked on. So we worked on Don't Breathe, Call Me by Your Name, searching. So whether it was genre movies, horror movies, independent movies, auteur movies, most recently Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino, that was kind of those are the kinds of movies we worked on that required a real specialty type of marketing.
Sure, sure. Well, that last movie I recently had watched not too long ago, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I thought it was phenomenal in the perfect blend of reality and fiction, and you using current events to a degree to kind of weave that into the story. And of course, Tarantino is a master at what he does. But so, what I find interesting, and it's got to be a particular challenge, but it sounds like you were almost subconsciously prepared to really view the world in an international sense, in how you were raised and being a military brat and understanding travel. And so when you look to market a release of a movie, now, is this something that you have one particular region that you have to focus internationally, or is it Asia and Europe and, all over? And what does that do to your planning and execution, knowing cultural differences and what it could be accepted in one culture is taboo in another? And so talk through that and please share any experiences that good or bad that you had seen that kind of scenario.
Well, actually, when I worked back at Gray, I did do some international work. So I worked on games, and what I early in my career found out or just understood inherently, and also having a Japanese mother, was just that everyone's paradigm in different countries. I call it American glasses, but each country, they wear their own glasses, and that's to me, I use that term because when I do interact with different countries and different people, I have to always remember consciously that I have to get that emotional quotient and that international kind of mindset. I have to consciously put it on and take off my American glasses.
Sure.
So
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's about. So what ends up happening strategically is there's some core, treating the film like a product. There's some kind of core, you do your traditional, strengths and weaknesses and evaluations and research. Positioning is key. But so if you position a particular movie, like this movie is X and, here's the story, there are some universal truths, but in your market positioning, you keep it flexible enough so that in the territories, in the markets, and when and I did work on APAC, EMEA, everywhere, LATAM. There's enough. You kind of have to give up a lot of control in that. I'm not going to tell somebody in Mexico what Mexican values are. So in your marketing position, you make it broad enough, flexible enough that they can adapt and tailor. Sometimes you have multiple positionings. And LATAM is a family market when it comes to films, family values, that matters. Russia is an action market. Mm-hmm. So there are some kind of rules and idiosyncrasies, but there's no hard rules. Okay. Surprises happen all the time.
Now, I think the one thing, I'm sorry. I was just thinking, in terms of, say, one release for a particular movie, have you executed two completely different activations in different markets, with maybe that overarching theme that you had mentioned there in terms of the...
Yeah. So sometimes when we, that's the scalability of the marketing position and objectives. Yes, that probably leads into, I would say we did, well, let me go back to the positioning. So we had a movie called Baby Driver. Mm-hmm. And Baby Driver was one, that's a challenging title, so it doesn't always translate well. So the leader, the marketing leadership in that territory kind of advises on a different name. Um, and it's not necessarily execution, but it was positioning. So, for example, on Baby Driver, in France, it was a romantic heist getaway, sexy movie. In LATAM, there are, the research showed there are tons of gearheads. They were all about the cars.
Okay.
And the
So for some of us ignorant people, LATAM, could you help?
Latin America.
Okay. Got it.
So Latin America is the region. And in Latin America, what is kind of unique is there's Brazil. And Brazil, from a marketing standpoint, culturally, it's kind of an island within LATAM. They don't speak the same language. And so when I refer to LATAM, it's the region. And EMEA, obviously, Europe, Africa, and then APAC, Asia Pac, Australia, Asia. So if I'm talking about the regions, but
great, thank you for that. That's very helpful for a lot of listeners. So now we know I'm going to say LATAM constantly.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the United States, you have the same kind of, regionalities. Obviously I've lived on both coasts and, definitely. So if you think of it as the regionalities of a large country like the United States, it still applies.
Sure.
Absolutely. There's Portland, Portlandia, Portland, quirkiness. You have Texas, but then you have Austin in the middle. So the cultural nuances. But going back to Baby Driver, my overall point was just that you emphasize different things. There was the music in the UK. Music is such the director was British. So there were different things and different attributes we could lean into. So executionally, we did in Singapore, which was about the romance and the sexiness of the lead stars. It was just a full-on premiere, and we brought talent there and did a big mall visit and really approached the lead actors because they were young and sexy in a matinee idol approach. But in Mexico, we ended up doing a car junket, and meaning we brought in the stunt driver, Jeremy Fry. He's one of the best, most famous stunt drivers. And we brought the cast, and then we brought in car magazines from Mexico. It was in Mexico City. And then for content and influencers, we had everyone go-kart race with the talent, the director, and the stunt driver.
Yeah.
And then that was, those are an example of two very different executions, very simple executions.
Yeah. And I actually love that you had referenced the music, because the one thing that points out to me with the movie Baby Driver is the soundtrack. And actually in my, small circle of friends that, enjoy movies, that was the calling card, is like, oh, the soundtrack really made the movie. And so it was interesting that you had said that, the UK's deep history and with rock and roll and indie music and all the cultural influence that music has played there made a lot of sense. And so what type of programming or activations did you do there tied into the music? Was there anything?
Yeah, we basically, and I mean, Once Upon a Time's another example in terms of music, but in the UK, we really promoted the soundtrack. If you looked at the soundtrack on Baby Driver, I don't even know if they were deep cuts and B-sides. And so we had to really do, radio, terrestrial radio, shockingly, is still huge in the UK. And as well as it's a newspaper culture. So we really leaned heavily into promoting the album there, having the cast, autograph albums, do playlists, listener parties, really kind of old, we would call here in the United States, old style traditional radio promotion.
Sure.
But it really fit.
Yeah, I'm looking at the soundtrack now, and you want to talk about deep cut. You even have Young MC, and it's not the popular song "Bust a Move." It is Know How, which I couldn't tell you what that sounded like, but
Yeah.
it's a great playlist and highly recommended. I mean, obviously watch the movie, but I thought the music was woven in perfectly to the action and the setting of the movie and everything. So that's really cool. So have you had other experiences? Talk to us a little bit about your other favorite activations that, obviously we're a technology company and we drive, a lot of our engagements through the lens of technology. But one of the things that we really try to talk to our brands about or our clients is, we're constantly tech first, but it doesn't necessarily mean you need to shoehorn technology. And sometimes analog experiences are just as effective and fun. And, when you can merge the two, that's, in my opinion, that's where the magic really happens, because it's both tactical and, futuristic and all of that. But so maybe tell us a little bit about, that range, of activations that were pretty analog and maybe pressing the limits on tech.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with, I've done, like you said, I've done stuff. There was a movie, Resident Evil, where Sony R&D in Tokyo opened kind of the vault to me and showed me some really cool technology they were developing, in early stages. My kind of partner in crime over there, who was the biz dev person, he was like, "Come over. I'm going to show you a range of technology." And Resident Evil was probably, it's Mila Jovovich. It was probably number 4 or 5 in the franchise, very popular game, but there were rabid international fans. And Hiro Ohara, the biz dev person, basically gave me this deep tour of Sony engineering. And you would go into these rooms and they look like garages, and these guys were just tinkering and being creative, and these engineering geniuses were making some phenomenal things. One thing that was happening in the audio department was they were playing with haptics, but and I always thought haptics, like on your phone, I always, the vibrating, and I always thought, I don't know why, I always thought as, a non-engineer, it was a mechanism, it was a physical mechanism of vibrating, but the haptics that they had were all audio. So they had embedded multiple speakers into a vest, and you would feel the vibrations and the pings from, and then match it to a visual. Well, what they were missing was the visual. So for me, my marketing problem was I had a matured franchise with zombies, and I wanted to really create, it had a gamification sense to it, because Resident Evil, the movie, and Resident Evil, the game, fans of the game weren't that interested in the movie, and fans of the movie were not actually, in a lot of markets, interested in the game. But and so how could I get something newsworthy, create content, and use Sony technology? So basically we created a fake game where you put on this vest, we got the filmmakers to provide us the CGI zombies. You played the game. As a consumer, you didn't know the game was rigged, but and you wore a vest and you started to feel the zombies killing you.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
That's so talk about a 4D experience, right?
Yeah. And it was totally like, people were screaming. I mean, as a studio, from a marketing standpoint, we got great content. We got to showcase Sony tech, early Sony tech that hadn't even gone out, that wasn't ready, to go to market yet. And then I got a layer of earned media value. I got the talent to do it. And it was integrated with, high level CGI from the movie. So it was kind of this perfect storm. And then, as we talked about, it was scalable. So we went to movie theaters. We went to India, Spain, Mexico, Japan. I can't even remember it all, but because it was such a blur.
Yeah. Wow. So how many total vests did you travel with? I mean, were you have freight loads?
I think we traveled with more engineers than vests
Okay.
because the vests would die. So it was probably like 10 vests, and it was long days because people thought they could win the game and they couldn't. But
Sure.
the thing was, no, and also too, it was the challenge of moving high level equipment. We were going to go to Brazil Comic Con and through different countries and the logistics of that. And then having these engineers who, although speak English, it's not their first language, these
Hmm.
Japanese engineers, but a lot of them got to travel the world for the first time. They got to see people having an emotional and physical reaction and
Sure.
screaming and laughing to work that they had been developing for years in the recesses of Sony engineering and R&D.
Yeah, imagine getting that project brief across your desk and, you're 6 weeks into developing something and you just not know how the heck this is going. Like, what am I even doing? And then you finally see the culmination of your work.
Yeah.
It's very cool. And I thought it was interesting that you had mentioned sound because just recently, we work within a lot of touch screens, right? And so given the environment, there's a lot of sensitivities with germs and people wanting to avoid, touching any particular surface. And so we've been doing a lot of research and development in gesture control, right? So you want to, be able to use your hand movements in your body to control a piece of content. And so, traditionally we would use 3D cameras. Most popular, the Microsoft Kinect camera is probably one of the ones that we repeatedly use. But there's advancements in all the types of gesture registration. And so we recently came across a platform that uses radio frequency to break the plane of where you're moving. So that is the tracking module. And I was just so blown away that I would have never thought for a second, infrared light, sure, that all day long, but, so radio audio. Yeah. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And so,
yeah, you don't think of audio as being able to constrain anybody. You just, at least, and it's so funny because my husband was a sound engineer, dialogue editor for Rugrats for a long time, and sound engineer for Universal. And so, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Well, what happened from that, and also too, I had the advantage of, I had Sony projectors and Sony, we had all these fantastic products. So that was a good activation that really, and then the more important thing from the marketing standpoint is the earned media value. We got great stories, we got influencers, the talent. So it was scalable and special. And then that actually evolved into, I was like, again, my colleague, Hiro Hara, who's a genius. I think he's at Rakuten now, but he's amazing. And we actually won the chair. Kaz Hirai gave us an award for this collaboration. It was cool, the chairman of Sony. But that actually evolved into, we were both like, we had another movie, Insidious, and it was either number 4 in the franchise. It was a horror movie. And both, he was like, and I was too, he was like, hey, if we could hapticize one experience, I said, could we hapticize the whole movie? So we evolved that into having, instead of 10 vests, I was like, can you make 100 vests? And we put them in theater, and then you orchestrate the entire movie.
Yes.
To feel the jumps and to really feel the jumps and the scares and, maybe, create an experience where everybody wears these vests. The challenge there from an audio standpoint was you had to actually orchestrate the haptics so that you didn't foreshadow the scares and ruin it for the audience.
Right. Yeah, you didn't want to telegraph someone jumping out of a...
Right. And you could actually play jokes on them too, where they didn't think it was coming, and then they were like, and that we launched in Hong Kong. And, in Asia, a lot of audiences don't react in a big way. When I was young, I saw Empire Strikes Back in Tokyo, or I'm sorry, in Osaka, in a theater, and it was the first time they clap, but they're very polite. They don't laugh out loud. They don't have big reactions. what was great about this haptics vest experience was they were squeaking and yelling and cringing, and you saw a lot more emotionality than you normally do in Hong Kong audiences. And then we also took it to Mexico, and again, the engineering challenges there, again, just moving things into Mexico and with Japanese engineers, but the audiences were there lined up around the corner. They were like, we're in. This is like, it was almost like a theme park experience.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So those are probably my two biggest techie ones. And then sometimes you just got to go lo-fi. And, for me, it was, I had a movie called Escape Room, where there was no real known talent, and it was a young director, but the room was really innovative, and the concept of Escape Room was sticky. And so what we did, and also the movie was launching in January, which, January movies, if you don't have a big star or a lot of what we call theatricality, you really have to put on your marketing hat, because people are cooked from seeing all the movies in December. It's back to school. So for Escape Room, TikTok was really emerging as just a great social platform. So I do a lot of influencer creator campaigns, and this was the first one TikTok had ever done. Mm-hmm. They had never partnered with a movie before. So what we did is we took TikTok influencers, I think from 17 countries. So we had 20 plus TikTok influencers from around the world, brought them into Madrid in January, and then had built a escape room. And the escape room essentially was very lo-fi, meaning, they had to complete some challenges, but, we, in the movie, there's a room where the walls start collapsing if the victims don't solve a problem. But in real life, we had, two construction workers behind this wall, and they were pushing the wall in, and laughing. And then, there was, we did a thing where if you didn't answer a question at the end, the pinnacle was, if you didn't answer the right questions about, just like in the movie, you drop through a trap door, about 9 feet. So that was kind of an example of a low-tech version of, doing an activation with influencers.
Yeah, well, it's always about the front of the house, right? It doesn't matter how it works and what's happening. It could be a hamster in a wheel running the engagement, but as long as the experience is good and the customers or the consumers are having fun, I mean, that's what it's all about. So, even on our tech side, we can relate to some of those lo-fi powerful engagements where, behind the scenes it's one thing, but on the front of the house it's a fun experience, and that's all that really matters. So let me ask you this, obviously with movies in particular, I think as an industry you see such a far wide and scalable promotion and media buy of big release movies, anything from your traditional billboards and your print ads, to TV junkets, as you had mentioned, and from our purview and where, the industries that we involved in, how would you say over your career that experiential marketing has become, maybe, 10 years ago, it was a bit of a niche thing. You do something stunty, you maybe do a station domination or something along those lines, hand out tchotchkes, but talk about the evolution of experiential marketing in the movie business, from your experience.
I think, I think the evolution of it is, I feel like as a marketer, my only job really, because of the nature of the economics of, you make 50% of your box office gross the first weekend you open, no matter what country you're in.
Wow.
Is my job is to create FOMO, is to create fear of missing out, as the kids say.
Sure.
To create an urgency. And so I think with, you're absolutely right. The experiential part has evolved. I think one, with the fragmentation of media, meaning, traditional advertising, doesn't really work in the sense, obfuscation used to be if you had a not so great movie, you kind of hide it in the trailer. But then the rise of social media, how many times have we all gone to a movie and we're like, oh, that's not like the trailer.
Right.
So the rise of social media, and which means the rise of accountability to filmmakers and movie studios, that word of mouth, Twitter will kill a movie, everything will kill a movie. So
Sure.
I think there's that. I think fragmentation, traditional advertising, streamers, mobile, the evolution of mobile, definitely. I think experiential just shot off. I think once the digital natives of Gen Z and mobile smartphones and cameras got really good, I think that's when experiential marketing was required to break through.
Right.
In my opinion. So you couldn't, remember the unboxing videos? I mean, they still happen, but I think when people were able to broadcast their opinions themselves in a high quality way through the mobile phone, I think it was, in my opinion, absolutely essential as marketers in order to create that FOMO. And it's coincidentally my background's photography, so I'm always about the shot, or I'm always about the visual, because it's the quickest delivery of the message. But I think that's when experiential was required.
Yeah.
And
I agree with you, because, what I like to say, back in 2008, or right on the onset of the iPhone, where apps was the big rage, and, there was just, it was going to change our way of life. And, we had seen a trend in where brands were looking to capitalize on that, but the delivery methods were fairly limited in terms of what you can do. I mean, who's going to download the Sony picture app, right? For the hell of it, that's right. A tough ask. But what it did was open up the eyes of technology and engagement, knowing that our culture has shifted and changed, because we're now, leveraging a handheld computer to interface with on a daily basis. And so to me, that felt like the on-site and growth of experiential and shareability and memory, in terms of using technologies, brands getting behind it to promote their product or services, and consumers being able to interact with them in a much different way. And so, and it's still fairly new. I mean, we're under 15 years. I mean, heck, I think 2008, I mean, it's 12 years ago. And so it's still very new and early and exciting, because I think as technologists, even over the last 5 years, you've seen so many different technologies come to front, and some even die, come and go, right? Yeah. And so speaking about the past, I mean, this is always a challenging question when looking forward to the future, but where do you see, and who knows what the new normal is going to look like, but in terms of where our current environment is and the movie industry, where do you see marketing efforts heading, maybe in the short term, and then maybe 12 to 18 months from now?
I mean, I think going off of actually, the perfect lead-in was your experiential question. I personally think that, with programmatic ad buying now, of traditional, the old way of buying media is gone. And if, as a marketer, your competitors can afford programmatic media buying, then you need to find different ways to go beyond that. And I think, again, experiential is really the goal for marketers, really is unique content, user-generated content. You want to kind of, I always think you want to create cool or trending or viral, which is pretty impossible because the audience determines that.
Sure.
But I think experiential is so essential. One, because it creates a perception of ubiquity, but it's still special. Mm-hmm. And then that creates kind of the hype. And I think that is what was required, since traditional paid advertising and paid media is programmatic. So if you want to be competitive, sure, you got to do programmatic, make sure your advertising or your marketing communications are being received by the right audience. But I think you have to go beyond that to be competitive. And you also have to, I think, as a marketer, the future of it is we've had to, in the old days, it was about controlling the message. And now I think for me, I am okay, brand safety and all that, but you have to loosen up a bit more and more about the specific narrative in your marketing needs or your content, and now allow your marketing narrative strategy to be more dynamic. And I think in that's where you start, because user generated content is here and it's going to keep going and going and going, and it's going to get more sophisticated. I think the thing that I feel like with Gen Z, they're just personalization is so important to them, and they're so discriminating and sophisticated. So I just think that you kind of have to up the game beyond the automated tools and the AI that is coming to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and just sorry to interrupt, but I think some of the market research too has really honed in on. You had mentioned the Gen Z, but the millennial market, which is now the coveted demographic and all. But I think study after study completely validates that experience far outweighs many other things from a traditional consumer standpoint, right? It's less about things for the younger generation. It's more about experience. And so we're all in the experience business to a degree, right? As a movie house or a studio, you want to create that movie experience and bring people out of the homes and into a theater, or even, suspend disbelief at home, right? But you want to create that experience. And so when you tie in your marketing efforts to a visceral emotion and memory, it's such a powerful thing, because it lives beyond the 60, 120 minutes of a movie or a game, right? And then, of course, you add social to it, and then there's your scalability and amplification and all of that good stuff. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think emotional affinity, it's one of the hardest things to do. There are people who love Nike. They are sneakerheads.
Sure.
So I think the future of marketing or at least the opportunities, is how do you foster extreme fanship, and how do you pay attention to how do you get those customers to evangelize beyond, like I was talking to some I was on the side, I have they were sports entertainment bachelor degree candidates, and their final presentation was on a sports brand, but they were just talking about sneaker culture. And so that's one thing I think as marketers is, as like you said, millennials and Gen Z, the affinities, or at least the good marketers, the affinities for brands become, how do you get them to become consumers and evolve into fanship? I think, obviously you're, sports marketing and that sort of thing. Fanship is a little more obvious, but to have fanship for a brand, like to think of it, like women who love Louis Vuitton,
sure,
or love certain designers, or there's even there's a movie studio called A24, and they're one of the first movie studios, and I think they're amazing, where they are developing their brand. Most people who go to the movies, at least in the past, they don't really know. They know what a Disney picture is, but they don't really know that Paramount and Fox, or
sure,
they don't really know that that's that movie. They know what a Disney movie is. Well, A24 is a small brand. It's a movie studio, but they're really, they're creating a slate of movies that are creative, unique, auteur, high-level art house. But at the same time, they're developing their brand, where they're really, people really identify their fanship. Oh, I'm an A24 fan. What?
Yeah.
So I think it's evolving brand affinity to an emotional level, and that brings it to extreme fanship, and that's where I think the future of marketing in general is going. But What do I know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's so funny that you say that because maybe I'm just an oddball too, but I remember towards the latter half of college and that kind of time frame for me, I would always say Lionsgate films I loved anytime that there was a
Oh,
Lionsgate film because, they were, a bit indie, big studio / edgy, it wasn't like your
yeah.
run of the mill rom-com type of studio, but
Well, it's funny you mentioned Lionsgate. I know two executives there. The president of marketing is Damon Wolf, and the president of earned media and publicity and content is Maurice Liston. And what they have done, to your point, they have also been doing brand building with Lionsgate during this crisis, where they're presenting movies for free, and they're on YouTube, Dirty Dancing.
oh wow.
They're creating content that Lionsgate as a studio cares about movies, but they also care about people, and they're reinforcing what you're talking about. So there's an emotional affinity. They're creating, you see stuff on LinkedIn, but they're creating movie nights and really embracing, even though you can't go to the theater, you can, they're kind of eventizing, showing special movies on YouTube.
Yeah.
And they're doing a lot of marketing to promote that brand. They're another one. They're like an A24 where they're starting to build that. So he'll be happy to hear that you mentioned
of course, and thanks for the tip because I have a 10-year-old. Well, she's going to be 11 in a couple of weeks, but one of her interests is really learning about movies that I grew up watching, right? So last weekend we watched the Back to the Future trilogy, and so she loves going back in time and watching the movies because she's growing up in a generation where CGI and Pixar and all these wonderful advancements in cinema are right in front of her. So I love the fact that she kind of goes back and can kind of laugh at some of the props and some of the movies, but in general she can really appreciate the older movies. And so Dirty Dancing's probably a little bit beyond her parental guide there, but that's a good thing to look into. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we're nearing our time here, but I'm going to put you on the spot because this all kind of came about last night that the light bulb went off, and I don't. This isn't premeditated for the listeners. I just want to throw a name out, but this past holiday season, my wife and I went to visit a girlfriend of hers that she went to college with, and it was at that time. It was the first time that I got to meet her significant other or boyfriend and what have you. And so he and I hit it off pretty well. And, we, grabbed a beer, down the street from their apartment. And, he had told me that he worked for Sony Pictures. And so last night it kind of dawned on me. I'm like, wait a second, this is 1 in a million. I don't know how many employees. It's with 30,000 employees. I don't know. But does the name John Fredberg mean anything to you?
John Friedberg.
Friedberg. Yes.
Is he yes.
Yeah.
Yes. If it's the same person.
I can't imagine there's many John Friedbergs that work in.
He is head of SPIWAG. So he actually, I worked very closely with him. He actually is head of, he acquired. So Sony produces movies. They also acquire movies. So he goes to Sundance, sits in the dark for, 20 hours. He's an amazing, really smart guy. And then watches movies one after another and after another. And then decides, not only from the creative standpoint and the theatricality of the movie, but the kind of the long tail of profitability. And he has to make these decisions really fast. And he basically acquires a lot of movies they call it Stage 6 or Sony Pictures Worldwide Acquisition. So that's so funny.
Isn't that small world? And it was our intention was one beer, but he's such a great person to talk to, and we can just riff on different ideas. And so it was the first time we hung out, and I think it was probably about 6 beers.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah.
he's one of the smart guys in the room, and he's also a cool guy. He's a really nice guy, and
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Absolutely.
don't always find that combination in the movie business
Yeah.
that they're smart and nice.
Yeah, I joked with him. I said, he reminds his personality is very much of a writer. He's got this cynicism about him, and he's sharp and he's quick. I'm like, you should be a writer.
Yeah, and he's also passionate, but I think that's why too he's such a good deal maker.
Yep. Yep.
You know, yeah, no, that's so funny. That's
Yep.
very
So we'll
random.
we'll have to share this when we post it over the weekend. And so, Milissa, this was awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything for our listeners, social media or any way to contact you? Is there any method that you
Yeah,
prefer? Or so go ahead and
yeah. Well, James, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
of
And I want to
course.
shout out to Natasha as well. So thanks for inviting me. It's fun to, it was really fun to kind of reflect back on all the stuff that I've done. And, LA and New York, the coasts are such a bubble. And so it was really fun to look back on the work that I've done and talk about it. I would say the best way to contact me, I do consult. I'm consulting with the company's called Summer Company, and we just provide global film marketing services from strategy to executions for the entire ecosystem of the entertainment industry. I would say right now the best way to contact me would be on LinkedIn, and I have a weird spelling to my name. It's Milissa, and last name Douponce. And just link into me. And no, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, James.
Awesome. Well, our pleasure. And this will be posted over the weekend. And as you know, past listeners, you can find us on SoundCloud, Google Play, all of the fine places, Apple Music, that you can listen to podcasts. So we'll get this uploaded. And of course, I'm James Giglio at every social media. You can find MVP Interactive at every social media. And have a nice weekend, everyone. This was great. Thank you, Milissa.